3, 2, 1. Okay, so back for another try. I think there were 2 yesterday. Back to the suicide experts. We're starting at the same, my favorite part, the inspirational part, not on purpose, just the way it worked. I'm gonna try to stop saying I like a pause. DBT. For suicide, the experts say DBT works. And I'm going to go on a little bit of do not disturb. So I love that person a lot and definitely need to talk to them. So I'm glad that they called. I know my video is laggy. I'm limited by my equipment. I tried to go through the salvage in this home, and I put together some pretty good pieces and spent the morning on help, and the PC option that I hoped to have needs to be shipped back to Zydex in Utah, and it has a cost that I can't do. So we're gonna strut along with no more video after this, but I think it's important to see the media that inspired the media. So my day, I had a nerve test today. I have numbness and tingling. Into my lat and into my spine in what feels like the same level as where I had a T-spine contusion. And I know what that level is because I could tell by how my breathing would change when it was that problem. And this feels like partly that, but some of it I wonder about the handcuffs, because they were pretty tight. I had a lot of welts and bruises. And in exploration of handcuffs since then, specifically the ones that don't have a link in between, if I was spent any time at all with that on specifically my left wrist. I had 2 different surgeries on my left wrist. Yeah, and I was bruised and welted. I mean, I asked them to take photos, but they said they're not allowed to photograph patients. They did make me strip completely naked and expose myself to multiple staff members for evidence of self-harm, but they could not photograph the welts and bruises on my hands, wrists, and arms from the sheriff's deputies, and they could not take photos of the hand and fingerprint bruises that were up and down my arms and legs and torso, back, everywhere, over like a little while after I arrived. Anyway, I don't know how we started talking about that, but to be continued Friday and Saturday. So I could not salvage the PC, so we're going down to just audio, which I love too. I'm going to stop saying I believe it was yesterday. I have no idea now how long ago this was. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention posted about an event that they're going to be hosting for people who are surviving or losing a loved one to suicide. And I asked on their post if they had any resources or events for people living with suicide. They said suicidal thoughts. I say living with suicide. And they said, thank you for reaching out, Allie. While we don't have any events for people living with suicidal thoughts, you can visit, they put a link to a page on their site for support in finding a mental health professional. 988 is also available 24/7 to provide emotional support. You are not alone. Mental health professionals in my state are not legally or ethically allowed to talk to me about suicide, so that's not an option. And 988, if I call 988, law enforcement will be at my house. There's not a question about it. That's not an option. So I am, in fact, alone. But I'm not alone because I have one of my favorite alternatives to suicide calls tonight at 7 p.m., where we do a bunch of cool shit that doesn't always happen on every alternatives to suicide call. And the one tonight is cool because it's deeply rooted in nature and art and some like really dark imagery. And oftentimes people share their art on the call, which I love. And the facilitators are phenomenal. So I'm excited about that. But I certainly need to remember to respond to their response to me. This is American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, does not have any resources or events for people living with suicide. Question mark. Earth to people with suicide. I'm here and we are a go. Let's listen in to see what we have here. Checking back in, suicide prevention expert. His name is Dr. David Jobs. And he is being hosted by Dr. Ali Matu. And we're picking up where we left off yesterday. And we're off. 3, 2, 1.
Using a car to crash in a tree that they put a picture of their kids on their dashboard. I mean, things like that may seem silly, but they actually do make a difference.
Interesting to characterize it as silly.
I remember you sharing this line that you use, and I have used it so many times, Dave, in all of my work, which is before you make a permanent decision about your life when you are in this temporary state of risk, let's take some of these actions and give the treatment a chance to work.
Yeah.
Pause. Temporary state of risk is not my experience of suicide as a person that lives with suicide. I'm saying a temporary experience of risk is not my experience of suicide.
You probably say it a lot better than I do, but it seems like that's also what we're talking about with the family here is we know you're struggling, we know you're suffering. Let's make the home a little bit safer temporarily to give all these things a chance to work before you make a permanent decision, because that decision is irreversible.
Yeah, you know, I'm known for, or infamous for saying to patients, you can always kill yourself later.
Me and YouTube think alike.
Here's a hot take. If you have a message,
it's hard for me to breathe. Wow.
Never make the impact that it truly deserves until you
it hurts in my chest so bad. This does listening to this. I can't believe I have to do it again. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Which is true. But as a licensed provider, if you're going to talk to me about this topic, here's the DC Mental Health Act. Here's the line about clear and imminent danger. I would rather not hospitalize you. So in the spirit of informed consent, and you took ethics from me, you know about how important
I do.
Informed consent is. In the spirit of informed consent, if you venture into the zone of clear and imminent danger, I have to stop you. That's a duty of mine within our jurisdiction.
My chest is pounding.
So here's the deal. You know, that in my case, there's an intervention that I know that works in about 6 to 8 sessions, 12 on the outside. Everything to gain, nothing to lose. You and I get to be dead forever. What's your hurry?
That sounds, looks, feels, and hand motions like a sales pitch to me. And to be completely honest with you, like I'm going to have to start looking away from the screen because his hand motions seem like a little bit aggressive And it might just be the amount of risk that I feel around this person that's making me more in tune to that. Like, the more time I'm around him, the more I'm noticing things that I need to notice. So I want to stop noticing it. So let's finish.
Wouldn't it be better on your dying day to know that you turned over every stone? Wouldn't it be better to know that you tried a treatment that's proven to help people all around the world decrease their suffering in this way, than having not done that? Wouldn't it be tragic if you took your life before you knew whether this could work or not? And if you do that with love and sincerity and earnest regard, most people are like, yeah, I could try that. It rarely does it come down to an adversarial thing where I feel like I have to call the police. In fact, I don't. I mean, I just haven't done that ever.
Well, what you're describing
is an option. What you're describing is an option between 6 to 8 sessions or calling the police, is what I heard. And then I think there was also some claim of proven, what is it proven to do? Because I'll live with suicide forever. It's a consciousness. I manage it. And I couldn't learn that in 6 to 8 sessions. There's no way you could learn enough about me. And I've never learned anything in clinical care that's helped me manage suicide. I'm not allowed to talk about it. I wouldn't be allowed to talk to you about it. So what are we talking about in 6 to 8 sessions? Here's my money.
I mean, even hearing it, I've taken multiple courses with you. I know you personally. I know
here's
you
his money.
professionally. I've known you for a long time, and a lot of the things that you say have become part of what I say. Despite all of that, Dave, what you just said, my initial reaction was, that's provocative.
Ooh, same.
It kind of raised my blood pressure.
Yes.
Yes.
At the same time,
Yes, Dr. Ali.
very validating.
Really?
You
Pause, because to me it seems quite invalidating, completely invalidating, and ignoring my entire experience of living with this.
are speaking truth to the experience I'm having.
Oh, opposite.
And a lot of what I'm hearing in our conversation, and this is what I want this show to be all about,
What?
is a lot of this seems to be about speaking to the things that someone is experiencing, speaking to the things honestly, openly about the suffering that they're experiencing.
Ali, when I was in grad school, I had this professor.
I think we can speed up a little bit now. I'm
And
just
she
gonna
was
fly
older,
through this. None of the rest.
in DC.
Let's
Mark
just
Leon.
keep
She was very
going.
famous here in Washington, and she was a protege of Henry Stack Sullivan, and she founded Tavistock here in Washington. And we took a second-year seminar with her, and she was probably in her 80s. And I remember this one session we had. She said, "Oh, you young people, the importance of honesty and truth in psychotherapy is highly underrated." And we're like, truth and honesty
Oh,
is
right.
important, And now, 30 years later, I think it's all about the truth and honesty, especially people taking their lives.
Well, going back to some of these classic therapists, like a Carl Rogers and humanism, so much of that was about being honestly present. Unconditional positive regard means you're truly listening and you're truly reflecting back, and you are there with the person. And I also think about like behavior therapy. You mentioned Marshall Linehan before. So much of the layers of validation that she's talked about is about getting to a place where you can be radically honest with someone else.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope some people listening to this are also taking away, is one of the best things that you can do is to be honest about your fears and your concerns and your love for the people in your life.
Absolutely.
Oh, I thought he was trying to suggest that people that are going to be in this treatment be unafraidly honest. But he was talking about family members. Everything around suicide is about people that have lost someone from suicide. None of it is around people that are living with suicide.
So, Dave, tell me about this treatment. I've been trained.
That feels exactly like gaslighting abuse feels. Like, I thought he was making a totally different point, and then when he made his point different, now I don't even remember what he was talking about. And my brain is gone. Welcome. Okay, he's been trained and he understands it.
They understand it. When you first explained this in the seminar on suicide that I took with you, it seemed so practical and almost like it just made too much sense. So can you explain to people who might not know what this treatment approach is how do you and your lab and everyone you're trained, how do you approach the mental health problem of suicide?
I feel this in my chest.
We approach it based on the idea of a collaborative relationship. That person says that they're suicidal, and the person will say, well, you can't kill yourself. And this person will say, well, yes, I can. And the person will say, well, no, you can't. And all of a sudden you have something that we know doesn't work, which is an adversarial dynamic. So back at Catholic U, where you went to grad school, and I teach, I work in the counseling center where we developed an assessment tool called the suicide status form. And long story short, after different iterations and different experiences and research steps, we started administering this side by side. We would ask for permission to take a seat next to the patient, and we'd go through this assessment tool together. And there's different quantitative.
Physically move and sit next to the person.
With the patient's permission, which during the pandemic we had to make some adjustments. I can tell you about
that. Okay. Any assessment tool increases the intensity of suicide for me. Upon arrival, I have a very specific need for physical space. I'm not okay with physical touch, and if someone asks to move into my physical space, I mean that the action of someone physically moving in my physical space, and then to like name it too, and to ask for it. Number one is, this is a phrase that I don't like. I think it's been monetized, is trauma informed. It is not professionally informed to even ask to like physically move within every single person's space as a practice.
Sure. But the symbolism of getting on the same side of this and going through this tool together is...
That's being taught to be done every
and
time.
Most clients find that to be a very validating experience, and we're marching our way through this, and we get through a certain amount of assessment, and the patient a lot of times is surprised how much they're learning about their own struggle. And then we ask about, the clinician takes over, restore, staying side by side, we're still going through the same tool together.
Clinician takes over.
To come to a treatment plan, we'll say, Ali, we've really now got a sense of what your struggle's about.
Wow. In an assessment, they understand a struggle that I can't understand in my life.
But to do that, we've got to develop a stabilization plan. Should you get into a acute dark moment, that's critical, and that will involve reducing access to legal means and different problem-solving strategies who you can reach out to, including me, or the crisis line. And then we're going to treat
We already talked about the crisis line. That's not really a possibility. To when this happens, here's the plan. I'm going to call you. What if it's 2 a.m? What if I called 988 last night?
The 2 problems that you say make you want to take your life. Overwhelmingly.
2 problems that make me... That's invalidating.
Divorce, my kids
relational issues.
don't talk to me. I'm isolated. I'm going to get married. Things that people are... It's relational issues in suicide are ubiquitous. It's
my parents don't understand me. I'm doing horribly at school. I'm ashamed.
Being bullied by kids online.
Yeah.
It's a relational phenomenon. And then what comes in
second
third
in
is
my
issues of self-hatred
experience.
or issues of what I do.
Self-hatred.
I'm an engineer, but I always want to be on Broadway, where there's a vocational crisis. And the interesting thing about these, as you know, is that these are treatable issues. These are not like to eradicate them, but we can move the needle on these problems in about 6 or 8 sessions. And in so doing, the person's looking at suicide when they first come in, and now they're looking at it this way. And that shift is the therapy. So they can still have the thoughts, but they have learned to manage the thoughts, manage the feelings, and they're behaviorally stable.
Yeah, it's great. Me and YouTube are right on track.
You just need a concept and a way to record it. First, go to...
So I
Over the course
will
of these sessions.
say this. For me, suicide is not relational. It's not something that can be managed in 6 to 8 sessions. It's not vocational. It's a sense of being trapped. It's a decision to continue to survive in moments. It doesn't have a lot to do with dreams, aspirations.
Of CAMS, the Collaborative Assessment Management of Suicidality. So the SSF is a multi-purpose tool. That's the roadmap. It's also the medical record. For clinicians who are worried about malpractice, it's the medical record that's going to protect you from litigation, and patients like it. So it ends up being a very empathic, validating, collaborative experience. The clinician is an active participant and partner. You get a copy of all these documents. So that's sort of the gist of it. And then we've done a bunch of clinical trials to prove it works.
I remember
clinical
the
trials.
Side, and how practical and helpful it was. The bottom of it, at least in the version I was trained in, reasons for living, reasons for dying.
Yeah.
And that final question on the bottom, the one thing that would help me to no longer feel suicidal is, blank. Dave, that question has been probably the single most important question I've ever asked someone who is suicidal. And it tells me exactly what I need to do to help this person. If I can solve this problem, then I think I can save a life here.
He can save a life. I struggle with all this. A lot of the things that I think people considering suicide who are like living with it are up against are things like housing, nutrition, living in abuse. I think we talked about this, but not vocational. Relational in some aspect because of how isolating this is and because of like a lot of the rites of death that are lost in dying from suicide rather than in a socially acceptable way. Let's keep hearing. What's the one thing and he can save a life?
That it's just so practical, and to the people
Correct.
who are watching this, where can they learn more about this treatment approach? How can they learn more?
There's some people that can buy the Guilford book and just copy the forms and give it a go. And it's a shameless plug. Managing Suicidal Risk: A Collaborative Approach.
He said
47,000, which is not nothing, but it's a drop in the bucket. You think of 15,600,000 people with serious thoughts of suicide. It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And CAMS treats ideation better than any other intervention. It doesn't always reduce the behavior. There are other interventions that reduce behavior, but it treats ideation and hopelessness better than any other intervention. And so they can
And ideation is, how would you define ideation? Ideation is
having
better
ideation,
than
thinking
any
about
other
killing yourself.
intervention.
Suicide is a
What
solution.
interventions were studied?
What about the person who is chronically suicidal, for whom this is something that does appear to be in the back of their thoughts all the time?
Yeah. That's a great question, and for a lot of clinicians, sort of one of the biggest challenges. What I would say is that that's a different kind of psychology. When people are first suicidal, suicide's a bit of like a hot potato. You know, they got it, but they kind of want to get rid of it, and it's burning their hands. But over time, people come to feel differently, and the thoughts of suicide can be very comforting. It can be like a warm blanket that this sort of gives me comfort because I know I can control my destiny, and this is something that's mine. I don't want to take away from me. And that's a different animal. And CAMS may not be as good for that kind of person. You know, dialectical behavior therapy might be better, but probably sort of better, except for a subset of people like that, for whom CAMS actually, we did a study in Denmark that showed that it's highly effective. They're only 40% of that population. The other 60% are terrible. So there are subsets of populations that we study, and CAMS is good for people who are newer at being suicidal, and probably less so for chronic states. But DBT is good for chronic states.
Yeah, and so that also makes sense to me. If someone might be experiencing these thoughts for a very long period of time, and their relationship to these thoughts have changed, they might need something like DBT that does tackle identity issues, emotion regulation, how you handle distress, your relationships with other people, something that might more comprehensively tackle the way their relationship to these thoughts have changed. That makes a lot of sense.
We're doing
None of that makes any sense to me. What is this research? And I've lost track of what he was quoting with the study in 40% in chronic and ideation.
a line of research now, Ali, with people with lived experience.
Yeah.
So these are people who've been suicidal many times or are currently suicidal. They were asking them about the idea of a post-suicidal life.
So you can
And there's
take
a subset
their
of them that
ideas
don't
and
wanna
monetize
not be
them?
suicidal. Suicide's a part of their life. They're going to die by it. They might be doing quite well, but it's become part of who they are. And it's been a fascinating line of qualitative research talking to folks like that about, I assume everybody wanted to go to suicide, but not a subset of people that we're talking to, and that's been all interesting finding.
So
What's the
one more question
finding?
about treatment. You
That
work with
your
so many
treatment
people
doesn't work?
Who are suicidal or have been. You've also studied this. I'm just curious, and this was one of your first draws into this part of the mental health field.
Yeah.
What has all of this taught you about building a life working with all these folks, studying all these things? Where are you on that?
I have one more book in me about that topic, because when you study this for 40 years, as you're suggesting, you really learn a lot about life. And you learn a lot about people who struggle living it and what they don't have and what people crave. And so
I
really
feel like I'm living
Marsha,
shamelessly right now. I mean, I
Well,
just
I- I-
acted
I'm pursuing a life
shamelessly
living and sort of
up to
punishing
this
without
point.
really
I'm
being
embarrassed
discovered,
about how I
without operationalizing.
reacted to him.
And what's interesting, I remember in our Army trial, a soldier, we watched videos for fidelity and Harris purposes, and the soldiers in this case,
Shit,
they
I'm
recorded
being
the guy like,
shameless.
okay, got it, new mission, not kill myself. But my life is a dumpster fire. I'm totally screwed up. How am I supposed to live? And I was like, so just getting something not suicidal is a
It's
step,
not funny.
but doesn't carry the day.
Right.
In fact, one of the things that we've seen in research, you alluded to reasons for living, reasons for dying, there's a Swiss study that we did where we thought
How did you help that
detective
person?
in 2 years follow-up, it didn't do anything. Because for patients in that first session, they're focused on dying. The clinicians are focused on reasons for living. It's a clinician variable. That makes sense. So in CAMS, what we do is we bring in
No,
reasons for
it
living
doesn't.
later when there's been some traction. But what gives us purpose and meaning? That's really, to me, kind of the holy grail of it all. And what to me is pretty clear is that relationships, it sounds obvious or corny, but relationships is sort of like the big thing.
I will say this. I think it's really good perspective to understand that certain parts of this have to wait. It doesn't make sense to talk to someone that's like really an intense suicide about their purpose-driven life. Like, it's dead words.
Romantic
Waste
relationships,
of resources.
being a parent, being a brother, being a sister, co-workers, close friends. That's to me what seems to make the world go round. And then there's a lot around my own sense of purpose and what makes life worth living for me. That's very particular to me. And people about this all the time. I mean, I love like the concept of grit, because people who are suicidal don't have it.
Okay. Pause. All right, this is it. This is the part that inspired me to record myself on this.
Gary Vee is literally
I think I just
creators
flipped
out
the
the
wrong.
door.
3, 2, 1. This is we're going to pause and go back to normal speed. This is the part of the video that inspired me to be on video. No sunglasses, laggy as.
Then there's a lot around my own sense of purpose and meaning. What makes life worth living for me? That's very particular to me. And people, about this. You talk about this all the time. I mean, I love like the concept of grit, because people who are suicidal don't have it. They aren't perseverant, and they don't have a greater sense of purpose and meaning, a passion for making a difference in the world. A lot of what we're learning about Ali from talking with the lived experience folks is they have found a way to live by giving and making a positive difference in the world. And that's whether that's through lectures or through writing or poetry. It's been striking to me that people who've been, what Marsha would say, been in suicidal hell and have survived that, they're very preoccupied with giving to others and making the world a better place.
It's every time I hear it, I cry a little bit. Like, honestly, even the wording at the end, preoccupied, like you have to take something that actually is pretty impressive and amazing. That there's a group of people that has a passion for making a difference in the world. I wrote down has a passion for making a difference in the world. I think the language was preoccupied with making a difference in the world. I would argue people that are living with suicide hell, the most intense suicide, have grit. They are perseverant, and they do have a pretty incredible sense of purpose or meaning to stay. It's definitely turned into this for me, because I can't fucking stand to stay here with this going on.
So much of mental health seems to come back to these things: relationships, meaning, purpose, making a difference. Regardless of what we're treating, my clinical focus became treating anxiety, and the main motive, when it comes to anxiety, people don't just have anxiety problems and come in for treatment. People who have been struggling with these things tend to be struggling with them for years before they come for treatment, which is no surprise, and that's how a lot of mental health works. But the motivation for coming into treatment tends to be relational. I work with someone who spent their entire life in Manhattan, never left the island due to agoraphobia, this fear of situations where you can't escape, couldn't go to tunnels, bridges, things like that, and was very close to his grandmother, who lived in Queens, just across the bridge, and or through the subway. And the grandmother would always come visit him, and she couldn't do that anymore. And now he's in my office. Yeah. That's where the shift happens. So I think so much of this comes back to relationships. I want to talk about relationships for a minute. I lost my brother to suicide. A lot of this is very near and dear to my heart. I know it's near and dear to your heart as well. And what's the number around how many people are impacted by a death by suicide?
It's been increased significantly. It used to be thought to be 5 or 6, but now it's like 30. Yeah. In terms of people being meaningfully impacted by the loss of it.
Did they ever say the number of people who died from suicide in 2024? It's around 50,000. I didn't hear that.
Close friends.
That seems to fit my experience with my brother's loss. So how and you mentioned guilt earlier, that this is such a powerful emotion. So much complicated grief comes out of this. What can we do to help friends, help families who have lost someone to suicide, knowing how different that grief process might be than other forms of grief?
Yeah, I just did a really interesting series with this Catholic group that wanted to, because Catholics are terrible at this. There's a lot of people think that they shouldn't be buried in the Catholic cemetery, that they're going to hell.
I grew
That
up
too,
Catholic.
criminalized all this, but a lot of people don't know that. So this one pastor, deacon, lost a daughter, and he wanted to make a positive contribution. And so he interviewed me and Melinda Moore and some other people that are pretty knowledgeable, and talked about their stories. And what I said in that, which I always say, is to try to remember this person as how they lived and what you love about them, and not about how they died. It's not easy, but so much of the pain is the last conversation we had. What I didn't say, what I didn't do. I think about our professor of Catholic who took his life, Tom White, close colleague and good friend for years. And I think about the 2 days before he took his life, he stopped at my doorway, and I was reading my email and ducked his head in. And I was like, "Hey, Tom," and he kind of lingered for a moment and said, "You okay?" And he just kind of left. And more times than not, I was waving in and just like I did to him and sit down and had a chat. But I didn't that day because I was too busy taking my emails. And 2 days later, he took his life. So we all are, have these regrets or second thoughts. But this
That's a story about you, and a story about Tom's death. Had nothing to do with Tom's life.
person was a whole person who was more than how they died. And that's something I always try to say is like, can you try to remember what you loved about this person that made them so special to you? And then the other thing I always say and try to live is, can you live as this person would have you live? And honor their memory in so doing. And if you know that your brother or Tom or people that I've known and lost, we've lost 5 patients in clinical trials, and I've lost a patient when I was an intern at the VA. It is a wretched way to lose someone.
Excuse me, you're reading wrong.
It's also a wretched way to die.
Show me
And
your
that's
book.
not really often
I'm going to take a
discussed.
picture of it. Now.
I'll
Most people
say,
think that's blind. You'll never know exactly what was going on in their mind. It's just a horrific way to lose someone. But to me, the way that I can do what I can do is by having a mindset that I can do a lot. But I'm not this other person. I can never know for them what's best for them. I have my views and opinions. And this is true for my patients as well. But if they do pass in this way, I'm going to try to honor I'm going to try to honor them by how they would have me live and do what I do.
I remember learning about complicated grief after I became a psychologist, after being licensed. There was some training experience I went to. I remember that person telling me, or telling the whole class there, that it takes about 5 years for people to get to a point where they're able to talk about a death that occurred due to some type of complicated grief. And complicated grief meaning there's a variety of emotions that are created: sadness, anger, confusion, guilt, all of these kind of things that you don't have as someone guys due to a medical illness or an accident. That kind of stuff. You mentioned mass shootings before. I think that's also an area where there's a lot of complicated grief. And just knowing that really helped me, because it was about 5 years before I was able to talk about it more. My wife talks about that time period where it was like walking on eggshells. She didn't know what would set me off. And it's because if there's a TV show or another person and they say something like, "Oh man, it makes me so angry, I just want to shoot myself," it would be so overwhelming for me, Dave.
Yeah.
So it would take me back to finding out about my brother's death. It would reawaken all that grief, all those emotions.
Yeah.
So it took me years to get to a place where I could learn to regulate my emotions again, so I could even be present in those moments. And once I got there, then I could talk about and think about things in a new way. But that was phase 1 of my journey of healing from his loss, was getting to a place where I could be present together with people.
Yeah.
so 5 years for complicated grief, 6 to 8 sessions for suicide.
I don't think that's uncommon, and I think that's actually pretty healthy.
Yeah.
But first, I worked with a mother who lost her son, and she's got 3 very successful, healthy sons, but one took his life. And I worked with her for 8 years, and she was a bad mother. That was her scarlet letter, that I'm a terrible mother because my son took his life. Even though her other sons did well, and she was a grandmother and had lived and was married for many years, I just couldn't get her dislodged from that notion. It became how she knew herself. And that was heartbreaking to me, because she was so much more than just the mother of someone who lost a son to suicide. Yeah. But then who am I to judge? If I were to lose a child to suicide, I can't imagine how I'd go on. So I tried.
Some things that stuck out to me are that there was never a mention of, well, the only thing that was mentioned was how the one son died. Nothing about his life. What was said to the mother is, you had 2 sons that didn't die of suicide, so that makes you not a bad mom. Had all 3. Then what? And your version of empathy, you would, because of the way your kid died, because of the suicide part, not know how to manage it. That seems to me a little bit like shame and stigma projection, especially the intensity of the emotion with which I can't imagine was delivered.
I try to have therapeutic or thoughtful ways of approaching this, and try not to judge, because it is a horrible way to lose someone. There's just no question about it.
You mentioned how would they have wanted you.
It's a horrible way to die.
My brother's the person who introduced me to so many things. He was 10 years older than me, and it's very strange. I have been for a while at that age where I'm older than my older brother ever was.
Yeah.
Which is very strange. I have far more gray hair than he. I never had gray hair. It's a strange place to be. But he introduced me to technology. He introduced me to science fiction. He always encouraged my love of psychology and all of these things.
Yeah.
And after he died, and years after he died, I got to a place where I started wearing more T-shirts that communicated my love of Star Trek and this kind of stuff. I started doing this. And I can do video because of how comfortable he made me with technology. I speak at like Comic Cons and things like that about mental health and pop culture. And these are all ways that I feel like my brother would be proud of me.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah, these are very.
I would say you're honoring his memory. You're honoring his legacy.
Oh, I have.
Which is more than how he died. Probably.
Right. I mean, I've got these little Star Trek.
Is it? Because it's kind of a big deal how he died, too. Why can't the way that he died be honored? Or considered? Or the suffering that led up to it be considered? Or consideration for mercy? It's considered for other diagnoses, other health conditions.
Reminders all over the place because I have cherished memories of how he introduced me to all this stuff, and we would stay up late talking about all these things and what they mean. It took me a long time to get there, but I think that's a journey for a lot of survivors of suicide. Let's zoom way out.
Survivors of suicide. By that, Dr. Ali means people who have lost loved ones to suicide. Interesting. Okay.
We've talked about individuals a lot. I want to talk about society and big picture. There's a lot of discussion happening right now about the mental health crisis of young people, of teenagers, Gen Z, young adults. You've talked about how suicide rates have been going up, other causes of death are going down. What do you think is going on here? I'm sure it's not just one thing, but you've seen this also in the armed forces. You've worked on really big scale stuff, rolling out these things in the Air Force. Let's go big picture. What's happened today?
There's a lot going on in the space. We had a drop off of suicides in 2019, 2020, and it spiked back up after we were thinking, maybe we're on a downward turn. What is not?
Yeah. So nothing is working. Statistically, 2019, 2020 was COVID. I'm sure suicide rates spiked immediately as soon as everybody got locked together, and then we'll talk about this later. Emergency plan. The number one thing to do when you are in intense suicide is put yourself around people. What is the suicide statistic when there's another human being around? So that's what happened in 2019, 2020. How would we know what to do about suicide when the people living with it haven't been allowed to talk? And they're not even considered. When we talk about survivors of suicide, we're talking about people who have lost loved ones to suicide. The actual people living with suicide are not considered. Not in resources, not in research, not in care. There is support. Earth to suicide, there is support. Link in the chat.
Not dropped. Is anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. Again, I try to make
anxiety and depression we established at the beginning are not related, directly correlational to suicide. We already decided that. He said that.
We have 15.6 million Americans with serious thoughts of suicide on one sample survey in 2021. That's like 300 times greater than the number of people die by suicide. It is the iceberg of the suicide problem. And what's interesting about that is I've had papers rejected from a clinical trial where we only reduced suicidal ideation and not attempt behaviors. So the field has this bizarre behavioral focus. I'm not against that at all. But the bigger problem is one of ideation with 15 million people. So that is very concerning. In the UK, you can get DBT, but only if you make a suicide attempt. Otherwise, in the NHS, the National Health Service, you get support counseling. So my friends there are saying the patients basically have an operating condition to make an attempt so they get actual proven treatment.
Right. That's what we do.
So it's a crazy situation. And then what we know from the more recent data that you alluded to from the CDC is that young people, young women in particular, but also black teens, that we are seeing the death issue has been with middle-aged white males, is at 3/4 of our deaths. But the white males are coming down, and now young people of color are bumping up, and that's really concerning. And frankly, the research has been blind to color. So we have a specific study that we're doing with Sean Joe in St. Louis with black teens. We're trying to get LGBTQ plus teens because those are completely unstudied treatment populations, and we're trying to sort of change that. What I find fascinating is every week I watch videos for a clinical trial with teenagers and a clinical trial with college students, and we're going to do a clinical trial with children. But I get to hear what kids are wrestling with these days. These are pandemically affected kids. I've never before heard in my career, I'll never own a house as a reason for dying. I've never before heard people saying the earth is dying. I've never before heard of a young nursing student saying racial and gender oppression is my daily reality. These social determinants are really, at least anecdotally, we're studying it, different. Back in the day, when I was first working in University Counseling Center, we saw depressed college students. Now, it's 90% plus anxiety. Very little depression. At least in the practical anxiety in the Counseling Center, it's all anxiety. It's mostly social anxiety. So
I would say that these problems that they're finding related with suicide are not temporary problems.
I've been pretty alarming. And my sons are 25 and...
None of those were relational. None of those were vocational. Well, I guess the nursing one, but that was more,
I'm 27, and we talk a lot about this and about the generational aspects of this, and there are issues around social and economic equity that we talk about in depth. It's pretty considerable.
Yeah.
So,
there's so much criticism of kids and their smartphones, right?
Yeah.
One of the best responses to that I've heard is, well, what kind of world have we built for kids to look up to look off their screen and to be plugged into?
Yeah.
And it's we have a lot of big problems that we're facing as a species, and these are not easy to solve problems. It's quite concerning. The other thing that I'm very concerned about is one of the reasons why I started focusing on this kind of show, where we're going deeper into these topics. There are less opportunities for young people to connect outside of school. Those third places, which for my generation was more like malls and parks and things like that, culture has shifted, and opportunities for being involved in those, to spend time physically together, have gone down, and that really concerns me. So much of what we've been talking about is relationships, connection. It seems like we're so digitally connected, but it is harder to be connected IRL in real life. Last question for you.
Okay, so my feedback on that is my kids are very connected, and a lot of it is through like social electronics, gaming, Discord. It's healthy relationships. It's just different than what I have.
I can do this all day.
I know I could too. I'm gonna run out of film.
Well, you can't though.
Run out of space here. If we keep going.
Yeah, if you do.
This care package. Yeah. What are the 5 things everyone should put in that care package for someone they care about?
We'll just put the national lifeline number, which is 988. They should put the national text line number, which is you text home, the word home, to 741-741. I would put up a listing of all the key links for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, for Suicide Prevention Resource Center, for the CDC. We taxpayers have paid a lot to create resources for the public to learn about this. The CDC has a toolkit for youth suicide prevention that's very well crafted. I would absolutely include Tom Wilson's book, Cultures We Live, as a very, very respectful, meaningful engagement for people that are thinking about suicide. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And I would write a heartfelt letter about what this person means to you and why their life is so important to you, and that you would do anything that you could to help them if they would, if they'd be willing. Those are my 5 things. And I think, and then you gotta, or I would argue, one has to then sort of say, I've done what I can do. I've left it on the field, so to speak. I've really made every effort I can make as a sentient being, with limited influence over another person who's separate from me, one I care about very much. As a clinician, this is what I have to do, is recognize the limits of my influence. But I have a lot of influence, and I've got a way that's going to be, more times than not effective. But I can't make this person not do this horrific thing. And there's suffering involved. And so, odd way, Ali, to be honest, I become much less preoccupied with preventing suicide deaths writ large, as sort of like an absolute idea, and much more focused on suffering and decreasing suffering in the world, and decreasing the suffering in this person's life. Because to suffer in such a way that you think anything life is the solution is a horrific place to be. And that's what our intervention and my work as a clinician, as a professor, as a teacher, is really focused on, is that suffering and trying to decrease that suffering in the world.
In 6 to 8 sessions, that can be done. All right, I'm gonna do this, and let's go to my emergency plan. I don't know how many things this is. What I would suggest is making an emergency plan when you're not in an emergency. I think that's a good practice for pretty much everything in terms of managing all parts of life. Practice before you need to perform. One of the things that a practice that I got into was keeping track of yellow and red flags. Like when I couldn't understand music that wasn't bilateral music, Destin Dynamics, I know that's like an orange flag for me. Like I need to probably shut myself down and get some rest. When I get to a certain time of the day, like right now, if I reflect back to, I remember my morning because I had that doctor's appointment. Things like that. I've learned different things that become yellow and red flags. My impulse control, when I start getting mad at my dogs, that's a red flag. Like I need to go to sleep. And if that means that I have to use pharmaceutical intervention to do it, I just have to take a day and go to sleep and then decide the next day. That's safety. That's a safety plan for me. And it's based on self-awareness, which means remembering what's going on, which is tough to do when I'm suffering. When I get to certain points, I put myself around people. I mentioned that in the video. I don't do that in singles. Like I don't try to have any emergency people that are just one person. I talk to people in groups of at least 3 for safety. It also ensures entry and exit into the group, which is important for sustainability. And sustainability is really important for an emergency plan. Discipline, consistency, sustainability. Another thing that I always try to include in an emergency plan is what's your safe landing. So if you have to parachute out, how do you catch yourself? The goal, of course, is always comfort and safety. For me, it's really hard to receive that, and it was hard for me to figure out a way to do it. I've tried to do that in a smart way where I layer it, and then that way it becomes more of a practice. So I know I'm doing this, and this. That's all part of my safe landing. That way, if I ever don't have one thing or another, I can move things in and out. Everything has to be flexible and fluid in an emergency plan. There can't be one single thing that's an absolute imperative, or else it's not safe. Another thing I include in a safety plan is things that slow me down. A lot of times, for me, intense suicide, things are moving really, really fast. I use nervous system regulation. For me, that includes sound, light, physical movement, putting myself in water, temperature extremes. My pets help me regulate my nervous system. Humming and vibration, and then pressure, like a weighted blanket or a pet laying on either side of me. All help regulate my nervous system. I have tethers within my communities, people that I, like I said, can reach out to before it's like a critical alert to slow myself down. Getting on calls helps me slow myself down. Another important part of an emergency plan is hydrate, eat. Hydrate, eat. And then self-care, which is taking a shower, brushing teeth, taking care of your skin. For me, rest. I'm not going to say sleep because that's not really a choice. That's not up to me. I do the best I can. And again, this all needs to happen ahead of time, and part of that planning ahead is knowing what responsibilities I have and what responsibilities I'll need covered immediately, like on a dime. That's how an emergency plan works. So just thinking through it. I have other bigger parts of an emergency plan. I think I mentioned earlier, like I have emergency plans set up with every dispatch that could be called for me related to 911. Anytime anyone would call for a wellness check with any of the human services, child protective services, adult protective services in my state, everybody knows to let me know ahead of time. And I appreciate that. So next steps for me, I think I'm gonna, this was good. I think I want to use the resources that I have, which right now are not video. Link in the chat for if you love seeing me. Open the space up. I want to talk about hospitalization more. I want to get the folks with lived experience a little bit of a bigger microphone and a wider canvas. The things that we talk about are really interesting and really important, and I think that they can lend insight that can result to changes in care that'll improve outcomes, certainly reduce harm, and certainly center decisions in consent. And I think that's it. And I hope this records and I don't have to do it again. Thank you for coming. See you again next time.